Good morning to Archbishop and to Bishop Sproxton, Archbishop Costello, Bishop Sproxton and Deborah, who is the Director of the Catholic Education Office. Deborah says, I would like to welcome all the students here this morning, boys and girls, and the staff, ladies and gentlemen. I was at St Joseph's in Albany on the weekend, in fact, and on Thursday and Friday. Unfortunately, they can't be here today for obvious reasons. But it was lovely to be able to spend time in one of our regional schools and see how well Catholic education is doing right throughout the state. I would also like to commence this morning by recognising the Whadjuk Noongar people and pay respects to their elders, past, present and future. We at Arramore love hosting this event each year, and we particularly enjoy the fact that we are able to host students from all over Perth. Our central location makes it easy for us to be able to bring together as many students as possible from right throughout Perth, and some from regional settings as well. So thank you very much for joining us here today, and I hope that you have a very productive and engaging day. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you, and I'd firstly like to acknowledge the very warm welcome that Mr. Declan Tannen, the Principal of Arramore, has given us this morning. The Archbishop and I are very grateful and very thankful for the offer of the school to use the gym here, and it's certainly a wonderful building, and we're becoming very familiar with it because we've been here for some years now for the LifeLink launch. I'm delighted to advise that as well as us being here, the event is being filmed this morning so that everyone at your school, and especially the few schools unable to attend today, can share in this special event in support of LifeLink Day 2019. I'd also like to acknowledge our special guests, Dr. Deborah Sayes, Executive Director of Catholic Education WA, Mrs. Diana Altieri, the team leader of the Religious Education and Faith Formation team. CEWA is a much valued partner in our LifeLink Day activities each year, and we are indeed grateful for this support. And a very special welcome to all of you here today. Representatives from 29 secondary schools from across the Archdiocese of Perth. We're delighted that you have made the time to join us. So before we begin, I'd like to commence proceedings with a prayer. If you can all see the prayer, maybe you could join with me in this prayer. A prayer for charity. God of mercy and compassion, we praise you for your goodness. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Fill us with the spirit of loving service as we acknowledge the face of Jesus, your Son. Through the generous work of our LifeLink welfare agencies, may burdens be lifted from the shoulders of your people, and may they feel the warmth of your kindness and love. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So, what is LifeLink? Why was it started? And what does it do? And whom do we help? Many of these questions are answered in our Welcome to Lifelink video, which most of you would have already seen. But if you haven't, we'll be showing this to you after the morning tea break and discussing an exciting new project for Lifelink. What I'd like to focus on at this time is the number of people in need who are helped by our Lifelink agencies each year. Our Lifelink agencies reach out to help more than 34,000 Western Australians in need each year. To put this into perspective, 34,000 people would fill over half of the new Optus Stadium. The Archbishop's Lifelink Day initiative for Catholic schools started in 1998. The core objectives of the Archbishop's Lifelink Day for Schools initiative are to promote understanding of the Church's response to people in need within our community, to instill in Catholic students attending our archdiocesan schools a sense of responsibility for those less fortunate, to provide education and information of the work undertaken by Lifelink social service agencies in helping many thousands of Western Australian families and individuals in need each year, and to encourage a practical demonstration of faith by asking students, teachers and schools to organise a special fundraising event for Lifelink Day, with the proceeds aiding people in real need within the community. Since its inception, Lifelink Day has been warmly embraced by our archdiocesan schools. We are indeed grateful for the enthusiastic support of Catholic Education WA, and especially all the principals, teachers and students throughout the Archdiocese. Secondary schools have held fetes, free dress days, sports carnivals, walkathons, dances, international food days, and all manner of fun events which have been highly successful fundraising activities. I'm delighted to report that collectively, primary and secondary schools have raised more than $2 million in support of Lifelink Day. And every dollar has been directed to the service and care of people in need in the community. This is surely a remarkable achievement, and you are to be congratulated in your efforts. Last year, I'm delighted to say that our primary and secondary schools raised $108,316.69. I want to thank you all for your generosity. I'd like you to give yourselves a round of applause. The Archbishop and I hope that this year you will once again join together and raise even more to help our brothers and sisters in need here in Western Australia. Whilst Lifelink Day is officially launched on Wednesday the 5th of June this year, your school may undertake its fundraising activities any time during the school year. To help you to celebrate and share Lifelink Day in your school, we will provide a number of resources uploaded to our Lifelink website. From the Secondary School Resources button on the home page, you will have access to 2 videos of our forum today. These will be split into 2 45-minute sessions. Teachers will be able to access these in class to share with students. PDF copies of the LifeLink Day poster, which will be delivered to your school. Information on our LifeLink agencies with contact details. Samples of our LifeLink and LifeLink Day logos, should you wish to use them. And photos representing the work of our LifeLink agencies. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and sincere thanks for your continuing support of LifeLink Day. I hope you enjoy today's forum and whatever fundraising event your school may hold this year. I wish you every success. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Archbishop Timothy Costello and invite him to present his keynote address to us this morning.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here once again and to have this chance to be with you all. And thanks to Bishop Sproxton for those words of introduction. Those of you who know me at all might recognise that my voice is a little bit husky this morning, like probably lots of you and your families. I'm battling a little bit with the, I won't call it the man flu, but whatever it is that's going around, I seem to have picked it up. So if I sound a bit croaky, I hope you'll forgive me. That's why the water's handy there. I can grab it if I need it. Stating the obvious, I guess, if I say that we're all here for the LifeLink launch today for Catholic schools, I don't think anyone here is wondering why are we here. So that's the reason why we've gathered here this morning. And it's the reason why Bishop Don and I want to speak to you about our LifeLink agencies and the work they do in the church here in Perth particularly, but spread right across WA. One of the reasons for getting together here this morning is for us to encourage you to become real leaders. I'm sure you are already, but to kind of focus again on this challenge of being real leaders in your own schools so that you can be the ones who actually spearhead some effort in your local community to raise some of the money we need to keep our LifeLink agencies going. Many of you will know a lot about those agencies already and what they do and how many people that they reach out to. It's really important work. It's really hands-on work. It's really practical work. And we need our students in our schools to support us so that we can keep that good work going. But this morning also gives me an opportunity just to spend some time with you, to share some of my thoughts and dreams with you. And in a sense, to give you a chance to share with me and with Bishop Don some of your thoughts and dreams, some of your questions, some of your hopes maybe for the church. Some of you have heard me speak before, so you will have heard me say this before. But I want to say it again to you all because it's the most basic thing I know about the church. And it won't be a surprise to you that I, as the Archbishop, am a bit keen from time to time in talking about the church. Probably more keen than some of you are to always hear me going on and on about the church, but I think it's pretty important, and that's what I wanted to speak to you about this morning. Because when you stop and think about it, simply by being a student or a staff member in a Catholic school, you are in fact already in one way or another a part of this thing that we call the church here in WA. And I think you have a right to know what the church stands for, what the church believes and teaches, and most importantly, or very importantly, why it actually believes these things when so many people don't. I'm conscious that not everybody here belongs to the Catholic Church. Not everybody here necessarily belongs even to another version of Christianity, another Christian church. Some of you would be followers perhaps of other religions. And I also realise that for many of you, perhaps for a big number of you, the question of faith and where you stand in relationship to this question of faith is still an open question, still an undecided question. And I wanted to say at the start, because I do want to talk about these things, that I understand that and I respect that. It's not my intention or my job as a Christian or as the Archbishop to try and force anyone to believe what I believe. That's not my role. But what I simply wanted to do this morning was to help you, or to offer you some help, no matter where you happen to stand at the moment on the question of religion, to have as good an understanding as possible of just why the Catholic Church exists, therefore why Catholic schools exist, and therefore why your particular school exists. It exists to be a school, obviously, but it's a Catholic school. So why is this so important? As far as I'm concerned, it's all summed up in the title which Pope Francis gave to his set of reflections. He wrote them following a meeting of the world's bishops in Rome last year. He called the bishops there, not all of them, of course, but a representative group of them, to discuss the importance of young people in the life and in the mission of the Church. The central topic sounds a bit complicated. It's sort of church speak, young people, faith and vocational discernment. But in the end, when the Pope actually came to write his reflections, having sat through the synod, participated in it, listened to everything that the bishops and the other people, including a large number of young people, had to say, when he sat down to write those reflections, he used a different phrase, a different title, and it's there on the screen. Christus vivit, that's Latin. Christus vivit. Christ is alive. The very first words of that reflection you can now see on the screen. They capture, I think, the most essential thing about the Catholic Church and about Christianity in all its many forms. Christ is alive. That's a strange thing to say about someone who died 2,000 years ago. But what Pope Francis believes, and what I believe, and what most of us who belong to the Catholic tradition and the wider Christian tradition believe, is that Jesus Christ isn't just a great hero from the past, but someone who is alive today. That, after all, is what we just celebrated at Easter a few weeks ago. He is alive. And what it means for us that he is alive is partly the question I wanted to invite you to reflect on with me this morning. If he is alive, if he's not just someone who died 2,000 years ago and we look back and admire, if he is alive, what difference does that make to us, if any difference at all? You know as well as I do that the Catholic Church these days is under enormous scrutiny, especially, not only, but especially because of this terrible abuse of the young people, the scandal of abuse in our Catholic Church, not just here in Australia, but sadly right across the world. The Church is under enormous scrutiny, and so it should be. But one of the things which makes this scandal, which is widespread, of course, right throughout our society, not just in the churches, but one of the things which makes it so terrible is the unavoidable fact that it is such a shocking betrayal of everything that we as a church are supposed to stand for. And when I say that, I guess I'm inviting the question, which I think is a very important question for anyone who has any kind of connection with the church, is this: what is the church supposed to stand for? What is the purpose of the church in our modern world today? There is another way of asking this question, given that we believe as Catholics that the church exists not just because it was created, or not, in fact, not because it was created by the first followers of Jesus, something they just dreamt up and decided to get up and running, but rather because Jesus himself called this church, this community of people, into existence. He's the one who set it up. He's the one who got it going. And that would lead us to ask an even more fundamental question. Why did God send Jesus in the first place? And why did Jesus, in response to this mission from God, set up the church? And then, another question that flows from that might be, why, in spite of the dreadful failures and scandals in the church, and the betrayal by so many people in the church, including its leaders, both in the past and in the present, why does God still continue to keep the church going? Because it would be the conviction of many of us that in the light of all the terrible things that have happened, the church would have collapsed long ago if it wasn't God who was keeping it going. Why is the church still around today in spite of these terrible things? And of course, we also have to recognize that the whole story of the church is bigger than its failures. I don't want to pretend for a minute that these are easy questions to answer. I'm not even going to pretend there's only one right answer. But I am convinced that at the heart of any satisfactory answer must be the conviction that the church makes no sense at all, and therefore the existence of your school, your particular school, makes no sense at all. We might even say has no right or reason to exist if the church isn't meant to be, and is supposed to be, and can be when it's at its best, God's preferred way of bringing people into an encounter with Jesus. I'll say that again because I think that's really important. It's at the heart of why I keep going as the Archbishop, why I haven't walked away, why the church still matters very, very much to me, because I'm convinced that it is God's chosen way of making sure that through the ages, including in the 21st century, here in Australia and all around the world, people can still encounter Jesus. That's what the church is for. That's what it's supposed to be all about. The next question would then become, well, that's all very well, but who is this Jesus Christ? And what is the relationship between this man, Jesus Christ, and the church? In wanting to share with you some reflections about this, I just want to say to you something that's been a conviction of mine probably since I was the age that many of you are now. And in saying this, I realise that it's not necessarily the conviction that you would all share, but it was mine then, and it's stayed with me ever since. And it's this, that knowing about Jesus Christ, and actually knowing Jesus Christ, not just having knowledge about him, getting to know him as a person, is absolutely essential to a full and complete and happy life. Where does that belief come from? And I'm talking about myself now. I can't speak for anybody else, but you might find something in what I say rings bells for you in your own experience. Maybe, maybe not. In my case, first of all, it came from my family. I was born into a Catholic, pardon me, I was born into a Catholic family with parents who believed that it was both their responsibility and their wish for me to experience what it meant to be a person of faith within the Catholic community. So I was part of the local parish in which I grew up, and as part of that, there was this growing sense deep within me that what I was being taught at home by mum and dad, what I was being taught in my primary school education, a Catholic school in Melbourne, and then later in my secondary education, another Catholic school in Melbourne, was actually true. And that's a big step to take. You think about all the things you learn and have learned over many years in your RE classes, and think about whether you believe those things or not. I came to the conviction over a long period of time that it's actually true. It's not just myths, it's not just legends, it's actually true. And that belief has never left me, in spite of the scandals, in spite of the failures, in spite of all sorts of changes in science and technology. For example, our growing understanding of the nature and extent of the universe. In spite of all of these things, I've never lost my conviction that what the church is basically on about represents the truth. Not just my truth, the truth. That there's an objective truth that the church exists to share with us. This is what I and many people would call the gift of faith. The gift of faith. It comes to us, if it comes at all, in different ways and in different times in our lives. The question of religious faith, the power of religious faith to make a difference in a person's life, can come in unexpected ways and at unexpected times. My experience was that it was just part of my growing up as a kid, growing up in Melbourne. But that won't necessarily be anybody else's experience, and certainly not everyone else's experience. As I've said, I grew up with faith as just a natural, normal part of my life. Other people come to faith when they have a really tough experience that really tests them. That can happen at any stage in a person's life. There's some interesting statistics, for example, that show that after World War II, from 1945 on, for the next 15 or 20 years, right across the world, monasteries and convents were just full of people who'd lived through the terrible experience of the Second World War, lived through it personally and experienced it as such a destructive thing in the history of the world, and were looking for some answers to this question of the awful suffering and destruction that World War II had caused. Many of those people found the answer in their religious faith. Up on the screen you can see an image of Jesus reaching out to Simon Peter, who went through just such a difficult experience. Excuse me. I won't tell you the whole story, but you'll remember the basic outlines of this story. Peter and the disciples are out on a lake. They're fishermen. They're travelling at night doing their fishing. Jesus isn't with them. A storm blows up, and it's a really violent storm, and it looks like they're going to drown. And then out of nowhere, walking across the lake, Jesus comes towards them. They're terrified. They think it's a ghost. As he gets closer, he says, "Have courage. Don't be afraid. I am with you." And when Peter hears those words, he's full of energy, full of excitement. He jumps out of the boat, starts walking to Jesus across the water in the middle of the storm. And as long as he's got his eyes fixed on Jesus, he's okay. But then the power of the wind and the waves, everything sort of attacking him in a sense, he takes his eyes off Jesus, and what happens? He starts to sink. And he calls out to Jesus, "Save me, I'm going under." And Jesus stretches out his hand, grabs him by the hand, lifts him into the boat and says, "Why did you doubt me?" That's faith. Why did you doubt me? Reminds me of another occasion in the Gospels where Jesus is presenting a teaching that lots of people are having a really hard time with, so much so that some people say, "This is ridiculous, I can't believe this nonsense," and they walk away. And then Jesus turns to his disciples, including Peter, and he says, "What about you? Are you going to walk away too?" And Peter says, he's the leader, he speaks up for everybody else. He says, Lord, where else could we go? You have the words of life. That's faith. So let me talk a little bit about faith. And as I do, you might just be asking yourself in your own mind or your own heart, where do I stand at the moment in this question of faith? I think faith is a mysterious thing. I think it's a tricky thing. And I guess each one of us at some stage or another will have to ask ourselves, have I received the gift of faith? And if I have, what am I doing with it? Our Catholic tradition would teach us that the very fact that we've been baptised means that we have received the gift of faith. But receiving the gift of faith and using the gift of faith could be two very different things. You might have received it in baptism, but it might be lying dormant, just waiting to be activated. And who knows when and how God might step into your life and activate that gift of faith. What I've come to understand, however, is that it's all about a gift. It's all about God's generosity. God holds out to us this wonderful gift of faith and all that it's going to mean for our lives, but He leaves us the freedom to say yes or no. And I think many of you know that before I became a bishop, before I became I was a priest already. I was a teacher in a Catholic boys' secondary school in Melbourne. My experience there was that the years in secondary school are one of the most important times when people get to think about this question, what am I going to do about this question of God? What am I going to do about this question of faith? Am I going to make a decision that allows it to really influence me in my future? Or am I maybe not ready for that yet? Or have I maybe decided already not to be interested and not to think about it? One of the things I would hope to do this morning is just say to all of us, me included, it's never too late to say yes to the gift of faith. Faith, for us as Christians anyway, is faith in Jesus, in the God in whom we believe Jesus can be seen. These days, whenever I talk about faith or think about faith or reflect on my own story of faith, and it's a long story now, 65 years worth, I always add the adjective. You can see I've got a cold, I'm not concentrating too well. I always add the adjective, either in my mind or out loud, trusting. When I think of faith now, I think that it's all about trust. It goes back to what I said earlier about whether we're going to believe or not in what the church tells us about God. Because if what the church tells us about God is true, then what you saw on the last slide, that idea of Jesus reaching out and saying to someone in trouble, why did you doubt? Have courage, don't be afraid, I am with you. That's all true. And if that is true, then no matter where you find yourself and no matter what struggles you might be facing at the moment in your life, you can rely on this living Jesus, the one who Pope Francis reminds us is alive. You can rely on Him to help you get through. Jesus didn't turn the storm off straight away when He came to Peter and the other disciples across the water. He came to them in the middle of the storm and helped them in the middle of the storm. So that quote that you see on the screen now is a quote that I find very helpful. It comes from a New Testament letter called the Letter to the Hebrews, and it talks about trust. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. I can't see God, but I trust that God is with me. I can't see God, but I trust that God cares for me. I can't see God, but I trust that God will walk with me during my times of peace and during my times of turmoil and during my times of challenge and during my times of suffering. In one way, it's kind of an attitude of the mind. I will trust. But it's not just going on up here, it's also going on down here. We need to have people we can trust. It makes life much easier if you've got people around you whom you can trust. As Christians, we believe that we can trust that God is with us. I don't know how you feel about what I'm saying. I don't know if it's making any sense to you. All I can tell you is that this is the way it is for me, and this is the way it's been for me, not without struggles and difficulties, but been for me since I was your age and might well have found myself sitting in a hall just like this. I've learnt from experience that you can trust God. And when I think about it and I ask myself this question, it all becomes a bit clearer. What if it's not true? What if everything that I believe in and that I've grown up with and that I've committed my life to, what if it's not true? What's the alternative? If God does not exist, or if God does exist but doesn't care about me, or isn't with me as I journey through my life, and isn't leading me through this life to eternal life, then what's the point? Ultimately, what's my life going to be about if everything that I have learnt and committed myself to is a pack of lies? All of this leads me back to Jesus. Helps me to understand why Jesus is so important and so central to my life as a Christian and to the life of the church. I said at the start, and this is Pope Francis's conviction, that Jesus is alive. Not just a fantastic man who lived 2,000 years ago and whose memory we honour, but someone who's alive today. Behind that is the idea that Jesus is actually God among us as one of us. This is where Christianity parts ways with both its Jewish origins and the very close relationship we have with Islam, for example. Both of those traditions revere Jesus as a very significant person, as we do. But for Christians, he's more than just a very significant person. He is the presence of God among us as one of us. If that's true, then of course Jesus is still alive, because God doesn't die. That's the whole point of the death and the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus, that he continues to live, continues to be close to us, continues to be present to us as one of us. We use a technical word, it's up there on the screen, incarnation. Those of you who are English scholars, and even more if there are any Latin scholars here, you'll know what the word means. It literally means in the flesh or enfleshed. We believe that Jesus is the incarnated God amongst us. The God who created everything, present amongst us as one of us in this man, Jesus. And what that means is that when Jesus speaks, God speaks. When Jesus acts, God acts. When Jesus relates to somebody, God relates to somebody. When Jesus is telling us a story or a parable, God is telling us that story or that parable. This is really important for us as Christians, because what it means is this: if you want to know what God is really like, have a look at Jesus. So I wanted to spend just a few moments now doing that, but leaving you then to maybe when you get back to school in your RE classes, pursue this a little bit further. So I want to move on to the next slide, which is about a parable that Jesus told and that you'll all be very familiar with. I won't go through and read the whole thing, but I'll just give you the outlines just to refresh your memories. Now remember what I said. When Jesus tells a story to teach us something, it's God telling us a story to teach us something. The parable I'm talking about is the parable of the prodigal son, sometimes called the parable of the loving father and his two sons, because there's a good boy and a bad boy in this story. But I don't want to go into too many of the details now. The point about the story is this. Jesus tells that story because he wants us to understand what the relationship is like between God and us. So in a sense, you could put yourself in the story, not really as the father in the story, but as one of the two sons, or maybe as both of them at different times in your own life. You remember the story, the father had two sons. The youngest son decided he'd had enough. He wanted to go off and enjoy himself, so he said to his father, "Give me my share of the inheritance and I'm off." Now, normally children wait for their parents to die to get the inheritance, so it's a bit of an insult to go to your mum and dad and say, "Look, I can't wait, you're not dying quickly enough, hand over the money now." But that's what the son did. So he gets his share of the inheritance, he takes off, and we're told that he lived the high life. Did all the things he'd wanted to do because he wanted to be free of his father's influence, all of that sort of stuff. And of course, as usually happens in these sorts of stories, when he ran out of money, because he spent it all, he found he had nothing. Nothing to live on, no friends to look after him, nobody to care for him, no family around him. So he ends up working as a swineherd feeding the pigs. And those of you who know much about the Jewish tradition will know that that's almost the worst job someone who belongs to the Jewish tradition can have, to feed the pigs. He's there in the squalor and the grime and the dirt, and he's miserable and he's unhappy, and suddenly it's like a light bulb goes off in his head, and he says, "I know what I'll do. I'll go home. And I'll say to my father, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am not worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.'" He might have been foolish, this boy, but he wasn't stupid. He knew how to tug at his father's heartstrings. So he sets off, and you can imagine him rehearsing this story over and over in his head, practicing his lines, making sure he gets them right, because everything depends on him winning his father over. So he's walking along the road, he's saying, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm not worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." He's got the lines perfect. He's heading down the road. And as Jesus tells the story, the father spots him coming. And the implication is the father has put everything else on hold and has been sitting in the front room looking out his window, hoping against hope that maybe his son will come back. So he sees him coming along the road. He goes rushing out to meet him. The son sees him coming. He starts practicing his lines really quickly. The father comes up to the son, and the son starts his speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am not worthy to be called your son." But he only gets halfway through the speech, and his father throws his arms around him, gives him a big hug, welcomes him back, takes him back to the family home, puts new clean clothes on him, tells the older brother to go out and get a party ready to celebrate, because our brother who was lost has been found. The point of the story, really, there are many points in it, but the main point of the story is, see how the father treats his son? That's how God treats us. Remember, if Jesus is God in the flesh, then when Jesus speaks, God speaks. When Jesus explains things, God explains things. When Jesus tells you a story, God is telling you that story. And the question for us, and it's the question I've often asked myself over my life, is this: have I got the courage to believe that God is as good as Jesus says he is? Have I got the courage to believe that no matter what I do, or no matter how badly I might go wrong, all I have to do is come home and God will figuratively throw his arms around me and welcome me back? Is this the kind of God that I've got the courage to believe in? There's another story that I just wanted to remind you of briefly, and it's up on the next slide. And again, it's a story that you'll all know very well. Because Jesus isn't just talk. Jesus is a man of action. As I said before, if Jesus is God amongst us as one of us, then when God encounters someone and deals with someone and relates with someone, when Jesus does rather, that's God doing it. So this is the story of the woman caught in adultery. You all know that story. It's another one that's pretty famous. It's about a woman who has been caught doing the wrong thing. She's dragged in front of Jesus by the religious leaders of the day. If there are any kind of villains in the New Testament, it's the religious leaders of the day. So they drag this poor woman in front of Jesus and they say, in the law of Moses, women who are caught in committing adultery have to be stoned to death. What do you say? Now, it's really interesting to think about this story. The religious leaders couldn't have cared less about the law of Moses. All they were interested in was trying to embarrass Jesus. Because if Jesus said, well, I'm a good Jew like you, and I follow the law of Moses as you do, so let's all get stuck into it, hand me the first stone and off we'll go. If he'd done that, then people would have said, for all his talk about the love of God, when it comes down to it, he's all talk and no action. But if Jesus has said, no, Moses got it wrong, you can't possibly do that, that would be a terrible thing to do, then they could say, well, look at this. He calls himself a religious leader and he's refusing to obey the laws of our religion. So they've tried to wedge Jesus. They've got him in an impossible situation. No matter what he says, they've got him. So what does he do? He says nothing. Instead of opening his mouth, he squats down, picks up a stick and starts doodling in the ground. And I think what Jesus is doing is just trying to break the tension so that these vicious men have got a chance to come to their senses and realize what they're doing. But it doesn't work. So he stands up and he looks at them, not in an accusing way, but he just looks at them and he says, okay, well, what about this? Let the person who's never committed a sin himself throw the first stone. And of course, no one has got the courage to pick up a stone and throw the first stone because everybody there knows that he or she has already done bad things in their own life. So Jesus says that, and then he squats down again and scribbles on the ground again. In other words, he's not trying to kind of eyeball them into submission. And gradually they walk away, one after the other. So then Jesus stands up. He's left there just with the woman. He says to her, where have they gone? Hasn't anybody condemned you? And she said, no, nobody. And then Jesus said some words. Remember, when Jesus speaks, God speaks. Jesus said, I don't condemn you. Now go, change your life, don't sin anymore. I don't condemn you. I put the same question to you that I put to you a little bit earlier. Have we got the courage to believe that God is as good as Jesus says he is? That in spite of what lots of people believe about God, And in spite of what lots of very religious people believe about God, Jesus tells us that God is not a God of condemnation. God is a God who wants us to live better lives. God is a God who's asking us to go off now and to lift our game, if you like. But God is not a God who condemns. And of course, if we're followers of Jesus, that means we also should be people who don't condemn others. Where's Mr. Mendez? How much longer? 5 minutes, okay. I can't possibly say everything I wanted to say in 5 minutes, so I'll try and shorten it a little bit. What I've been trying to do is, first of all, get you to think about who this Jesus is. But now I just want to finish by getting you to think about what's the relationship between this man, Jesus, and the church. Because there is a 2,000-year gap between this man who said those words to that woman and us sitting here at Arranmore College this morning. So what's the link between this Jesus, this extraordinary person who we as Christians believe is actually God amongst us? What's the link between him and the church? And partly that's what the next slide is all about. If we take Jesus seriously, if we believe that when Jesus speaks, it's God speaking, then if you look across the whole of the four Gospels, you'll find that one of the things that Jesus does very deliberately is create a community around him. At the heart of that community are 12 men whom Jesus chooses especially after a long night in prayer, and he calls them apostles. And at the heart of that group of 12 apostles, there's one whom he chooses as the leader. And that person's name was Simon. He was a fisherman. But interestingly, Jesus decided to change his name from Simon to Peter. Now, the word Peter in our language comes from the Latin word Petrus, which is the Latin word for the Aramaic word Kephas. So whether it's Kephas or Petrus or Peter, the word actually means rock. So at a certain stage, and I won't go through the whole story now, Jesus calls these 12 apostles aside. He calls Peter out of the midst of them. And in the context of a particular incident that had happened, he says to Peter, to Simon, "You are Peter. You are rock. On this rock I will build my church." So if it's true that when Jesus speaks, God speaks, then it was part of Jesus' plan to call a group of people together who would become the beginnings of the church. And at the heart of that is this group of 12 who have a leader, and that leader is Peter. In our Catholic tradition, we've always understood that Peter, this is a bit anachronistic because no one in Peter's life would have called him this, but Peter was what today we would call the first pope, the first leader of this community of followers of Jesus, which was to become the church. So I just want to move to the next slide now and focus on the present Pope, the 260-something successor of St. Peter, and just say a couple of words about him, because what I'm trying to do is to say that for all of our difficulties and all of our challenges and all of our problems, the church today, with the Pope as its leader, is in fact the continuation of something that Jesus decided to do, which he thought was at the heart of his mission. And so that means, I think, and it's always been a conviction of mine, long before anybody had thought of me becoming a bishop, and I'd never thought of me becoming a bishop, so I'm not saying this to sort of protect my own position, but the church has always believed that at the heart of the church is this figure of the Pope, who together with the other bishops around the world take the place of those original 12 apostles as the leaders of the church. And one of the things that Jesus said to Peter towards the end of his life was this: when you have recovered, because remember, Peter was a bit of a failure. At one stage, Peter dismally failed by betraying Jesus, pretending that he'd never known him. And Jesus said to him, when you have recovered, when you've got over this, when you have received the gift of forgiveness that will be yours if you're truly sorry for what you've done, your job will be to strengthen your brothers and sisters in the faith. I mentioned all of this and I thought I'd just give you something that some of you might know already, but a little interesting piece of history. You know that Pope Francis lives in Vatican City, which is just on the edge of the old part of Rome, and that Vatican City is in fact the smallest independent sovereign state, like country, in the world. So the Pope's kind of in charge of the tiny little independent state right in the middle of Rome and right in the middle of Italy. St. Peter's Basilica is the main church, and the Pope lives just within Vatican City, just a few minutes' walk across a courtyard from where the Basilica of St. Peter's is to where the Pope lives. That Basilica of St. Peter's, some of you will have been there, I'm sure, is actually built on an old Roman pagan cemetery. And it's built where it is because it's built on the spot where Christians have always believed that St. Peter is buried. St. Peter was crucified in Rome, and the story goes that when he was crucified, he said that he was unworthy to die the same kind of death as Jesus, and so they crucified him upside down. And then his body was taken down from that cross and buried in this pagan cemetery. And church has always believed that that's where he is, and they've built the basilica on top of it. During the Second World War, Pope Pius XII, even in the midst of all of the horrors of the war, agreed to a kind of a secret, expedition, I guess, to see if they could recover the original site of Peter's tomb. So underneath St. Peter's Basilica, the present one, is built on the remains of an earlier one that was built around the year 300. But that earlier one, and you can go down and see it, was actually built on the pagan cemetery. They excavated the cemetery, and they eventually, in these excavations during World War II, discovered what they believed was the tomb of St. Peter. It's a long and complicated story, and I'm making it much more simple than it really is. But they eventually discovered a container in which they believed perhaps the remains of St. Peter were. Because of the new DNA techniques and all of that sort of stuff, they've done some testing on these bones. And in this photo that you see, the Pope is holding, the main picture, the Pope is holding a container which has the bones of, we believe, St. Peter contained within it. The smaller photo is the Pope standing at the tomb of St. Peter underneath St. Peter's Basilica. They discovered that the bones were the bones of a Middle Eastern man who died about 2,000 years ago, who appeared to have been crucified, but there were no feet, no bones from the feet. And the presumption is that if he had been crucified upside down, it was much easier for the Romans to simply cut the body from the cross, leaving the feet attached. Pretty gruesome, I know, but leaving the feet attached to the cross, and the rest of the body was buried. So there's really very little doubt, we'll never be able to prove it absolutely, but very little doubt that what we have there is the burial place of St. Peter. It's kind of one of those interesting things which helps support our understanding of this continuity between Pope Francis in 2019 and all the popes prior to him, which go all the way back to St. Peter, who was the first pope. It's a way of helping us to understand that this church, the church that has existed for 2,000 years and has had so many changes over that time and looks very different from the church that Jesus started, of just 12 apostles and a few disciples, that it's the same church and therefore that community that Jesus wanted to establish in the first place. What that means, and I'll finish with this, is that this is how Jesus is alive today. In and through this community of which we're all a part, who are meant to be, as the church, the living sign of Jesus, still with his people, still reaching out, still caring for people. And that brings me to the second last slide. Next one. That's it. Which is to LifeLink. How do we, the community of people who are part of the Catholic education system of Western Australia, how do we contribute to the task of Jesus keeping the church alive today? The screen says it all. It's a quote from St. John Paul II. We do it by following Jesus, who is the source of freedom and light. Be open to him so that he may lighten all your ways. We're supposed to be people who walk in the footsteps of Jesus. We're supposed to be people who contribute to the church, being the sign that Jesus is still alive and still present and still with us, still caring about us today. And that's where LifeLink comes in. Because our LifeLink agencies are one of the main ways in which the church here in WA continues to do this. Jesus reaches out to the poor and the lonely and the homeless and the rejected and the suffering and the abused and the marginalised through the people who are part of our LifeLink agencies. It's one of the ways in which all this talk that I'm going on about Jesus still being alive, is made real for people who need to have the experience of Jesus in their lives. That's why LifeLink matters. That's why all of our schools getting behind LifeLink and raising money, because we can't all be the hands-on people who feed the poor or clothe the naked or visit the prisoners or care for the sick. We can't all be those hands-on people, but we can all make our contribution to those who on our behalf are the hands-on people. So maybe it all gets summed up in the words of Mary MacKillop, our first and so far only canonised saint. Who knows, there might be a few others sitting in the room now that in years to come will join the group with Mary MacKillop. As the previous slide said, don't be afraid to be a saint. It's possible for anybody. But one of the things, or two of the things that Mary MacKillop used to say have stuck in my mind ever since I heard them. The first was this, you've all heard it before, never see a need without doing something about it. That could be a fantastic slogan for LifeLink. Don't see a need and then sit back and say, well, there's nothing I can do about it. You in your school can do something about it by helping us with LifeLink. But the second part is just as important. Never forget who it is that you are following. We're Christians. We believe that in Jesus we see God and hear God and touch God. We follow him because in following him we become the people that God created us to be. So thank you very much. I've ranged over a whole lot of things. I hope I've raised a few questions in people's minds. Before I close, I just want to announce which school or schools will receive the Archbishop's Spirit Award for the previous year's LifeLink Day. This award isn't based so much on how much money is raised. It's really presented to a school which comprehensively demonstrates active support for LifeLink. It's awarded to a school which embraces the goals of LifeLink, which you can see up there on the screen. It's awarded to a school which commits to educating its students on their responsibility to care for others. And it's given to a school which promotes an ethos of caring and compassion to students, to teachers, to families, and so on. Up on the screen, you'll see the schools that have received this award since 19 99. But I want to say that the award does recognise a particular school or a couple of schools each year, but in doing that, it's simply focusing on something that every school that supports LifeLink is really trying to do as well as they can. Bishop Don and I make this decision in the end. We get some recommendations, we think about them, we talk about them, and then we come up with a decision, and it's always a difficult decision. And before I announce the winners, I just want to mention a few schools which have fully embraced the goals of LifeLink, and they deserve special recognition. It's kind of a mixed thing, isn't it? If your school's one of the ones that gets the special recognition, you should be proud of that and feel congratulated, but also know that you're not going to actually receive the award this year because some other school's going to. So, first of all, to 3 primary schools which have been very good in the past 12 months in relationship to LifeLink, and they are Hammond Park Catholic Primary School in Success, Francis Jordan Catholic School in Currumbine, and Loretto School in Nedlands. And for the secondaries, Emmanuel College in Success. Didn't hear any groans from Emmanuel College people, so there you go. Mater Dei College in Edgewater. Still no groans. Holy Cross College in Ellenbrook. A few disappointed looks, but no groans. So I'm delighted to announce now the 2 schools that will receive the Archbishop's Spirit Award for this year. So first of all, for the secondary, the winner this year is the John 23rd College in Mount Claremont. Congratulations. Big round of applause for John the 23rd. Are they here? There they are. Well done, guys. Congratulations. And for the primary school, it's St Pius X Catholic School in Manning. So, in conclusion, and I'm then going to avoid Mr Mendez because he's going to go mad at me for going too long, Bishop Sproxton and I ask all of you to enthusiastically support LifeLink this year. We're trying to raise a minimum of $120,000 for people in need. And so with that, I want to officially launch LifeLink Day for 2019 and offer you the blessing of God, the grace of God, the encouragement of the Lord, and the promise of the Lord's grace to be with you as you try and do what you can to help all these people in need, to keep the presence of Jesus real and alive in people's lives. So may the blessing of Almighty God, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit come down upon you and on all those whom your efforts will help. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much to our Archbishop, who always presents so beautifully but gives us very strong messages. So I'd like to, and I realise and appreciate I'm separating you from morning tea, so I'll be very, very brief. So I'd like to today, by acknowledging that we are gathered on Whadjuk Noongar Budja, or country, and to pay my respects to the Whadjuk elders past, present and emerging, especially during this week of National Reconciliation Week. I also thank Archbishop Costello and Bishop Sproxton for your time to be with us here today, and thank the Principal, Mr Tannum, for hosting us at Arramore Catholic College. It brings me so much joy to learn that students in Catholic education have contributed more than $2 million since LifeLink began. You can feel proud of the role your schools have played in this over the many years. Archbishop Costello referred to Pope Francis's exhortation, Christus Vivit. This document is the fruit of the listening and discerning process of the Synod on Young People held in Rome last year. In the document addressed to young people and to the entire people of God, the Pope offers guidance and encourages friendship with Jesus. He praises young people by saying, "We cannot just say that young people are the future of our world. They are its present. Even now, they are helping to enrich it." He goes on to say, "I want to encourage all of you, because I know that your young hearts want to build a better world. Please do not be bystanders in life. Get involved." Jesus was not a bystander. He got involved. Don't stand aloof, but immerse yourselves in the reality of life as Jesus did. Above all, in one way or another, fight for the common good. Serve the poor. Be protagonists of the revolution of charity and service, capable of resisting the pathologies of consumerism and superficial individualism. I think we had those words echoed with Archbishop's presentation to us. The generosity and passion students in Catholic schools have for supporting those less fortunate than themselves really is a sign that Jesus is alive, and that the young people in our Catholic schools want to build a better world. At the heart of Christus Vivit is a call to return the basics of Catholic faith, that God loves, Jesus saves us, that he is alive and wants us to be alive. And to further extend that, I encourage you and invite you to a most amazing event that the Archbishop and Bishop John are hosting. Did I say John? Archbishop Tim and Bishop Don are hosting at the end of the year in December. The Australian Catholic Youth Festival is running from the 8th to the 10th of December in Perth, and we will provide young people from across Australia a wonderful opportunity to celebrate those basics of the Catholic faith. The festival is a national gathering of young people established by the Australian Catholic bishops. The festival will provide young people opportunities to deepen their relationship with Jesus, be empowered to be disciples in the world today, and to encounter and celebrate the vitality of the Church in Australia. I want to encourage you to do two things when you go back to your school. Spread the word about the Australian Catholic Youth Festival. And can I have a show of hands now, name and shame, who knows about the Australian Catholic Youth Festival in December this year? Not bad, Archbishop, we're getting there. The second thing I'd like you to do, as we heard today, is be ambassadors for LifeLink. I want you to spread the word and accept the challenge to fundraise even greater amounts if you can. As Pope Francis says, you as young people can be protagonists of the revolution of charity and service. And to remind us what St. Mary MacKillop said, as Archbishop said to us this morning, is be the change. Never see a need without doing something about it. There is great hope for the future of our society because you are following Jesus and you're opening your arms to the many others who do not have what you have. So I thank you very much for your attendance today. I thank our schools and the staff for bringing you along and for supporting you in your venture of LifeLink. We're going to have a fantastic year, Archbishop and Bishop Don, and we're going to be really working in earnest to our fundraising to ensure that those without can certainly have more. So thank you very much.